Hi, this is Lance Falk, and you are listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome back to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo. I guess right off the huff here, I'm just going to address the fact that I'm very much under the weather today. I have been for a few days, and clearly, you can probably hear it in my voice, I'm kind of losing it, so I'm not going to talk too much on the intro here, but I did want to take one moment just to give a shout out to somebody who recently said some kind words about the podcast in public forum. Scooby Addict, who runs the Scooby Addicts website, recently blogged about their favorite podcasts, and among a number of distinguished audio programs such as Serial, which I myself am a fan of, a podcast named Scooby-Doo made the list, which I'm thrilled to be included in such great company, and you can check out that list at scoobyaddict.blogspot.ca, and you can check out Scooby Addict's site at www.scoobyaddicts.com, where there's forums and all kinds of Scooby discussion and information, and it's worth checking out. Give it a click. You won't be disappointed. So it's great to get the shout out by Scooby Addict, and I'm glad that they are enjoying the show as much as I hope anyone is enjoying the show. It's the whole point of doing the show, right? And speaking of the show, this week is going to be something a little bit different than anything I've sort of done up to this point. It's been kind of a frustrating month because I actually have a handful of people. They're all willing to come on the show and talk about everyone's favorite mystery gang and their canine friend. But scheduling through April has been just incredibly difficult. Everybody's been really quite busy since moving on from Be Cool. And I'll say right now, one of the interviews that I'm lining up is with Scooby Apocalypse writer James DeMatteis, who has been hitting all the cons. It's the 30th anniversary of his and Keith Giffen's and Kevin Maguire's Justice League. If you follow his Twitter, you should follow his Twitter. You should follow his Twitter. If you follow his Twitter, as you should be, you will see he's constantly posting from all these conventions that he's been going to, and he's had his imagination workshops. We've been trying to schedule this interview since, I think, September of last year, just missing each other like trains in the night. And there's been a number of other people, same thing, just super busy. So I almost had an April with no show, and I just didn't want to have that dead month. I wanted to have some content out there. I wanted to have something for people to listen to and check out. And so I reached out to someone in the Scooby-Doo podcasting community. You may have heard of him. His name is Nick, and he is the producer and host of What's With You, Scooby-Doo. It's a podcast I enjoy, and I wasn't sure what would happen when the two podcasts collided, but I figured at the very least we'll have a fun conversation about Scooby-Doo. And as it turns out, it was more than a fun conversation about Scooby-Doo. It was really quite enjoyable having Nick on the show. We talked for much longer than you will actually hear here. And as it stands, because of the length of our conversation, it breaks down into roughly two 35-minute parts of the conversation that I've decided to release as 2 episodes. So there's the episode that I'm putting out today, and somewhere between 3 days and a week from now, I'll put out the second part. It might end up being a bonus episode for May because some of the aforementioned people who said they're wanting to do interviews are very likely going to be available during May. So if I can get that done, I will put one of those out. So there'll be 2 episodes in May. Everybody wins. I will also just point out this one thing. There is some language that is not safe for work. It's not crazy. It's not a Tarantino movie. But Nick and I drop a couple of not safe for work words. So if that's a concern, I just thought I should give a heads up. I don't think anyone's really going to care. If you've listened to Nick's show before, it shouldn't come as a surprise. But seeing as how everything up until now on my show has been totally straight with no cussing, I felt like I should bring attention to it. I'm probably making more of it than I need to, so I'll stop talking about it right now. So I won't waste any more of your time and listening to my horrible voice, and I'll let you just get to my conversation with Nick from What's With You, Scooby-Doo, where we try in a very, very roundabout, digressive way to figure out what it is that makes Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo. I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side.
Enough of this delightful, potentially humiliating banter. Light 'em up.
All right, so we're here with what is ostensibly the first Scooby-Doo podcasting crossover amalgamation, whatever you want to call it. We're with Nick Robes, the creator, producer, host of What's With You, Scooby-Doo, who was kind enough to join me on this episode, which is kind of an emergency pull it out of your ass kind of episode, because scheduling people is hard. I think that's the moral of the story today.
That is absolutely true, and may I say, it's so nice to be here in your ass, and I'm very grateful.
Well, I've heard it's warm and spacious, so
I'm reminded of Jonah.
There's just nowhere to go from there, man.
Conversation killer, Nick Robes. But thank you so much for having me on, sir. I'm very glad that the podcasting community of Scooby-Doo, the network, is so vivacious and friendly.
This is a good way to really quell those tabloid rumors about the infighting between the podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been plastered all over the place, how much, we're like Blur and Oasis in the mid-90s, which no one seems to remember. But if you do, you remember that there was some friction, and that doesn't happen here. We're smooth sailing. We're lubed up and ready to go.
I've heard stories that if I'm walking down the street, that if someone sees me, they open the window and they blast your podcast. Not true at all. Not true at all.
People just yell at you, "Let's do this."
I walk up at a supermarket and lie.
That's fun.
That actually happened to Damon Albarn, apparently, during the whole Blur Oasis thing.
Really?
Yeah, that's why he moved to Iceland. He said that he'd be walking down the street, and somebody would see him and open the window and just start blasting, like, What's the Story, Morning Glory or something. And he's like, are you kidding me? So he got out of England.
Just run up to him and hit him with a Wonderwall.
So the basic idea for the show this month is we don't really have an interview or a topic per se, but when I approached Nick to possibly join me for something, he suggested that we talk about what is it that makes Scooby-Doo Scooby-Doo as a show, because there has been so many different iterations over the 47 odd years.
Yeah, and I feel like I hear a lot of opinions about Scooby-Doo that a lot of people seem to talk about, what is or what isn't Scooby-Doo, and you hear things like, for example, well, the monsters have to not be real because then that defeats the whole purpose. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily, because there are quite a few franchises where the monsters are real, but they still inform the skepticism of the original series, and they're still kind of defeating these bad guys. So maybe that's not the thing. Oh, well, then it's, the whole gang. Well, the whole gang wasn't in necessarily Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, and that's fun. So maybe, and it's so weird to think that there have been so many permutations and so many ways of approaching this franchise, yet it still seems somehow cohesive. Like, without any better judgment or ability to, kind of make a through line, somehow it still always feels like Scooby-Doo. And maybe that's Casey Kasem. Maybe that's the answer. When
I tried to think of sort of what the connective tissue is, just so everybody knows, Nick and I picked 3 episodes from 3 different iterations of Scooby-Doo. Me and my Shadow Demon from 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo.
That thing was wild.
What is... Oh, God, I can't remember the title of the first episode of What's New Scooby-Doo.
Oh, What's New Scooby-Doo? The problem is I can never remember it because I'm always distracted by the fact that Brian Unger is in it. I'm always like, wait, that's the guy from How the States Got Their Shapes, right? There's no creature like Snow Creature.
So there's no creature like Snow Creature from What's New Scooby-Doo, and Be Cold Scooby-Doo from the most recent iteration, Be Cool Scooby-Doo.
Both of those, it has to be said, are also iterations or reimaginings of That's Snow Ghost from Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?
This is also true. But like I was saying, when I sat down and tried to sort of think what was the connective tissue between these shows and what sort of made one more Scooby than the other, I kind of found that it was kind of hard to pin down. And what I also found interesting about that was that anytime, like, that's one of the things that I ask everyone that I interview on the show, which is, what do you think is the magic ingredient that makes this show last for as long as it has? I mean, until Cartoon Network stepped in 2016, this show has been on the air constantly for like 47 years without a single break, whether it was reruns or original programming. And it goes on. It just goes on forever. 13 Ghosts is very different from, for example, What's New, but they are both Scooby-Doo.
And they feel that way. The other thing that's kind of crazy to me, and I think I've talked about this somewhere. It may have been on my podcast, but I doubt it. But it's the fact that Scooby-Doo, like Eddie Izzard has a bit about Scooby-Doo. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so common in the public consciousness, in the zeitgeist that spans generations, that it shouldn't. It shouldn't actually be like, I have listeners to my podcast in Iran. Like, that shouldn't happen. The fact is that they're sitting there watching Cartoon Network and being like, are there any Scooby-Doo podcasts out there? Or like it's somehow so compelling, like that those meddling kids, or well, gang, we've got a mystery on our hands. Somehow is like a black market version of Use the Force, Luke. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's like with the election that you guys had last year, and
God, really, got to bring that up?
Well, how many like Scooby-Doo memes did you see come out of that where they were pulling the mask off of Trump? My favorite, of course, being, he's just a bag full of racist rats.
And yet somehow nobody's done it in real life. It's crazy.
But yeah, I agree. Like, it's so ingrained in the cultural sort of zeitgeist or vocabulary. And it's also interesting to note that Scooby-Doo is a show that, despite being evergreen, and I believe you've used the word ubiquitous on your show several times, it's not a show that's kind of critically loved. It's a show that a lot of other people who run shows are like, why do those assholes with that trashy show, get renewed, and my cool show, just dies? And there's people who just don't understand, like, why does this thing persevere?
Yeah, I think it's literally magic. There's no other explanation for it. The fact that Johnny Quest had 30 years until it had a remake, not Real Adventures, but the one before it, The New Adventures of Johnny Quest, wasn't until the 80s, right? And then Real Adventures was like 10 years later, and Scooby-Doo had consistently had new shows every 2 years.
The Johnny Quest one really stumps me. Like, why doesn't that show, like, why doesn't it exist? It's a slam dunk concept.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons why Venture Brothers has done so well critically.
Maybe it's a lack of that sort of... One of the interesting things about Johnny Quest was, going off into these different places and seeing different things, and, nowadays with the internet, you're being listened to in Iran, so...
Well, I mean, fascinatingly enough, what originally killed Johnny Quest was the birth of Scooby-Doo.
Well, it was money. It was money more than anything, because it was a really expensive show to produce.
Well, also the violence of it was what oh my gosh, I'm not going to remember the name now. The American Children's Television Activists or whatever. They were protesting shows like Johnny Quest and Birdman and Space Ghost.
This is true.
And thus we get the franchise that will not die.
Well, it is also interesting. I keep saying that. It's also interesting. It's interesting.
Oh, I use fascinating on mine. I'm starting a drinking game listening to my own podcast.
It's interesting to note that, as you said, like Scooby-Doo was kind of created to find something that was a little more child-friendly, a little less violent. And when they first pitched Who's Scared, they were flat out like, no, this is not going to air. You have to take it back and retool it. Because it was too scary for them. And then that's when they were like, well, let's make it more about the dog. And
yeah, what was the original dog's name? I can never remember.
Too Much.
Too Much.
I don't know how many people I've told this, but I'm working on like an audio documentary. I'm working on an audio document. Oh my god, it's like X-Men Oranges. I can't say documentary right now. Have you heard that? A friend of mine introduced me to that. It was somebody was trying to talk about X-Men Origins Wolverine, and they couldn't say Origins. They could just say Oranges.
I'm making a note to look that up.
And the more you hear it, you can't say Origins anymore, and you just say X-Men Oranges. X-Men Oranges.
Oh, it's like Pontypool.
What is that?
Oh, it's a horrible zombie movie where postmodernism is the virus. It honestly is, like, the only way that they can overcome the zombie virus, which is transmitted by language, is to speak gibberish. And it's like, okay, like, this is the weirdest Jacques Derrida I have ever heard in my life. Like, Wittgenstein is turning over in his grave being like, come on.
So, X-Men Oranges aside. Yeah, I'm working on this audio documentary kind of about the history of Scooby-Doo. And in the research that I was doing, not everybody agrees. You know, you talk to Fred Silverman, you talk to Iwao Takamoto, you talk to Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. They all have a slightly different version of how it was created. And it was interesting to find out that the version that we have on Wikipedia, the version that all the videos that you see on YouTube and what we get fed off the DVDs, it's kind of like the urban legend. It's kind of the... We're just going to...
You mean where the clouds opened up while Ken Ruby was listening to Frank Sinatra? And God's light shone down, and he was like, Scooby-Doo?
That was
Where
Silverman.
are you? Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I found in Takamoto's biography, he talks about there was a drawing of a dog with the name Scooby floating around Hanna-Barbera for a few years. And I started looking at it, and I think I asked Lance Falk about it, because he's also like a huge Johnny Quest fan. He's actually more Johnny Quest than Scooby-Doo. But
that came off in the interview.
Yeah. So I asked him, what I'd been able to piece together was that it seemed like there was... Because Johnny Quest originally, they wanted, more of a Huckleberry Hound kind of a dog than a bandit dog. So even
like a talking dog?
Like a talking, walking, humorous dog. And Doug Wildey was like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. Well, because that doesn't fit into that show at all. I mean, that show is broad, but it definitely is realistic.
And they were, I think, hoping that sort of comedy relief, that, talking dog thing would be more interesting for the kids and take the edge off of the more sort of serious bits. As it turned out...
almost like that would be basically Jabberjaw, right? Because Jabberjaw has those Johnny Quest like laser cannons and like Dr. Zinn kind of characters where there's actual danger, and then in the middle of it you have Jabberjaw being like,
and I mean, as it turned out, Bandit still is there. Anytime there's a lot of exposition, you may or may not have noticed this before, but if you watch any episode of Johnny Quest, they sit there and they talk about the plot, or they talk about what the MacGuffin is, or what the stakes are, and then that will end because Bandit comes running in, and they play that do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do music. Because they're like, the kids are going to be bored now, so we need to, like, liven this up.
But we still need to get all this exposition across because people are going to be looking for these plot holes.
But anyways, yeah, so there's a fantastic Johnny Quest documentary online. I think it's called The Quest Files. Can't remember. It's definitely worth looking for if you haven't seen it or you're interested in Johnny Quest.
I am.
And he was talking about the wanting to use a cartoon dog. Takamoto was talking about there being a drawing of a dog with the name Scooby that had been floating around the studio for years. And I was thinking Johnny Quest is 63, Scooby-Doo is 69. Hanna-Barbera, famous for reusing material. It could have very easily have just been something that had been pitched already, and it's like, hey, what if we use this drawing or this name? And it got like shelved and just sort of worked its way back into the system.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought it was
I mean,
fascinating. And Lance couldn't
all
like,
the pieces are there for sure.
I do feel like I'm maybe creating connective tissue where there isn't necessarily connective tissue, but listening
You
to
might be room 237 this.
There is.
I mean,
God, I hated that
19
documentary.
Oh my God, there is nothing more fun than those people being like, you know, I mean, I had first seen Kubrick. I probably saw Barry Lyndon first, and I thought it was gorgeous, but I didn't think anything of it. Like, those people are my favorite people of all time.
Yeah. So, anyways. So I just.
But anyways, yeah.
Because there were holes in the stories, and you know, Takamoto, he's a very sort of practical guy, and he's not one to hyperbolize and, you know, create like this myth around the dog. Ruby and Spears were also like, somebody asked, I was listening to this great interview, and somebody asked about sort of how it went, and they were just kind of like, it's like, yeah, that's what they tell you.
Well, so on on my podcast, I had James Bladen, who he does music editing for TV shows.
Yeah, that was like the best episode ever.
Thank you. But he was talking about how, so he worked on Johnny Bravo, and Van Partible brought him into Hanna-Barbera to, like, you know, see what was going on, have a meeting or whatever. And they walked into Joe Barbera's office, and he was like, you know, Van Partible's like, hey, Joe. Joe Barbera is like, come on in, I got this idea for a new cartoon, check it out. But, like, so to James Bladen, a man he's never met, and by this point is just a studio engineer / music editor at a recording studio barely affiliated with Hanna-Barbera. He's just pitching cartoons, which are kind of like reformulated previous things just put into a different guise. It's like, what if they were all kids who work at a pizza shop? You know, I mean, it was like kind of that same idea as the difference between Scooby-Doo and Fangface or Jabberjaw or Goober and the Ghost Catchers, you know? It was like, hey, let's tweak it slightly and let's see what happens.
Have you listened to the Van Partible commentary on the Johnny Bravo episode?
I haven't. I read the blog that you reposted, and my heart was so warm.
You have to, if you can find the DVD, you have to, because it is the information that they give. They got the actual run cycles for the characters from the studio. So when you see them running,
that's why they look like that.
That's the 69 running. Like,
that's so cool.
And
I noticed that they reuse that. They do reuse that in Scooby-Doo and the Legend of the Vampire, which is the first one to feature the original cast.
Yes.
They have the exact same movements with the stationary, recycled back in the treadmill background.
Oh man, this is like total digression.
I'm fine with that.
If
you listen to my podcast,
I've listened. Yes. Anyways, Heather North.
Yeah.
Have you noticed how bored she seems most of the time? Like, I
feel like that's a tough thing to say, because I feel like once you start going down that rabbit hole, you realize most of them sound bored.
I disagree. Like, I think Frank Welker's Fred, like back in '69, all the way through to now, there's a consistency in the voice of, you know, whatever the show demands. Plus, he's just, I don't know, he seems to be genuinely doing the character, and the same with Velma. But I'm not wrong, right? It was Heather North that did Daphne.
Yeah, who was Frumpkin, Marla Frumpkin? She was the middle Velma.
Oh yeah, you guys talked about her.
Yeah, she kind of.
No, it was Billy and.
No, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Don'ts talks about her frequently. Yeah, she phones it in. Oh my gosh, Jaffrey.
Nicole Jaffe.
Yeah, Nicole Jaffe. Yeah, I feel like Nicole Jaffe does a great job. I also like her lisp. I like that she brings that to the table. But I mean, I love Mindy Cohn as Velma because it has like an urgency to it. But also the series that she plays it in have an urgency.
But just getting back to Heather North again for a second.
Yeah.
You listen to the '69 stuff, and you listen to, you know, Legend of the Vampire and Monster of Mexico, but yeah, I found that Heather North's delivery was so flat. It just really surprised me.
She hadn't been doing it for like 30 years, right? I mean, she dropped out of the business after that.
But I felt like she was kind of flat back in '69 too.
Oh, sure, yeah. But Daphne also was kind of a flat character.
Wah, wah. Fair enough.
Well, and to Daphne's credit, she had to be because everyone else was unbelievably broad.
Actually, okay, this brings up an interesting point. Daphne, up to the Be Cool Scooby-Doo era, or iteration, was very two-dimensional, and there was very little going on, and she didn't have a lot of agency, and she was basically there to be, either danger-prone Daphne, or to be the person who likes Fred, and the criticism was made for Mystery Incorporated even, saying that her entire role in that show was to basically want to be with Fred, and when
she wouldn't pass the Bechdel test.
And when you watch Be Cool, I think some people reacted poorly to Daphne having all of the Daphne du jours. But
do you have something weird that you're into right now? No, just my new pet falcon. One of my favorite lines of all time.
I can't see Pet Falcon anything without thinking of that Simpsons episode when Bart was stuck in the well. And he takes the hood off, and the falcon flies away, and there's that pregnant pause, and then, I don't think he's coming back.
Be Cool Scooby-Doo, building on a large tradition of falconry jokes.
What is with the butler jokes in Be Cool? Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, are there butler jokes in Be Cool?
Have you not watched Be Cool?
I have. Oh.
There's so many, butler gags, and I recently, in Canada here, we got 2 episodes of Season 2 on April Fool's Day. They did.
Oh my God! You guys got the entirety of Season 1 on Netflix. Now you have more episodes of Season 2. You're gonna rub that in my face forever.
Well, you're just gonna have to come over and watch them. Or we can do Skype video, and I'll just point it at the TV, and you can watch. But
I'll meet you in Quebec City in 20 minutes.
I know a place in Lethbridge.
But yeah, so there's butler gags in these 2 episodes?
In one of the 2 episodes, yeah, there's a butler gag, and they play I guess, spoilers, people are probably going to hate me for this, but...
whatever.
Yeah, screw that.
It's Scooby-Doo! It's not like a goddamn M. Night Shyamalan!
Oh man, don't get me started on Shyamalan. I have an episode of my movie podcast where I just go off the rails on Shyamalan because we watched The Sixth Sense again.
Ooh.
And that movie is so broken.
Shyamalan, Nolan, I have my problems with all these people. Anyways.
So...
But yeah, so...
the butler, yeah. So essentially the butler did it, right?
Okay.
And one of the characters is like, how could you do it? And he's like, well, it's in my makeup. And also money. But just, the whole, it's in his genes, the butler did it, right? The butler's half whatever.
Right.
And then I'm watching Be Cold Scooby-Doo for this conversation. And there's
there's a butler.
Clive, Dr. Mason, who's been in that hut for a week and a half.
A week and a half, sir.
He's like,
I don't know how long I've been in here.
What's the date?
What's the date? Well, and then of course there's Jeeves in Pup Named Scooby-Doo.
But there's also Party Like It's 1899.
Oh yeah.
And
who plays the Velma plays the maid, and then Shaggy's the chimney sweep in that episode?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the butler is supposed to play the butler.
Did the butler? No, the butler didn't do it. The husband did it in that one, right?
No, it was the guy who won the competition so many years in a row.
That's right. That's right. Man, I watched all that, or what was available on iTunes here, so quickly and devoured it 3 times in a row, and then haven't gone back.
It's all right. Bringing it back to the mission statement here. That's one of the shows that I do find you can revisit. That's one of the shows that has a lot of subtle humor, and the humor is all based in character. Because I noticed while watching 13 Ghosts, I actually I like what 13 Ghosts tried to do. It's the first show that tries to do an ongoing episodic narrative. And they tried to go a little bit darker, and the creatures are real. But that show is so gag dependent there's so little story, I think, in each episode.
Yes, absolutely. With I mean the gestalt of that whole idea is the fact that they introduce Flim Flam for no goddamn reason other than to be gags. I mean the whole of that character is based upon saying, as the Great Confused One would say, you know, that's his whole point, is to be the new Scrappy-Doo, to just be funny, be there for no goddamn reason, and then hopefully it'll be funny enough that people will laugh for so long they'll forget that this show was happening.
It did seem really weird that Scrappy was kind of the straight guy on that show.
Yeah, he just throws in a couple puppy powers and that's about it.
But the gags on that show, they're situational, and they don't come from character.
Yeah.
And the gags in Be Cool, it's Velma's fear of water. Ah, water, my nemesis. No matter what form you come in.
Like, if you think about, like, back to Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Or even, you know, new Scooby-Doo movies, there would be about what seemed like 4.5 minutes of just Scooby, like, looking in a mirror and being confused by his own reflection, and then, like, it would move on from there, and it'd be like, okay. And that happens in Be Cool Scooby-Doo, but once again, it's based on character and it's with a modern sensibility. So Velma going down the slopes trying to learn how to ski, and it honestly, like, stays still for about 10 seconds after she crosses her skis. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it's funny because it's tension building and it's character based. I mean, it's exactly what you're talking about.
I love that shot. They took the time to actually show her looking down at her skis, kind of hanging over the edge. It's one of it's one of the things that I like about Be Cool is that there is a concern about story. There is a mystery to be solved.
Yeah.
And I found that actually what's new was more story based and less character based. The characters were kind of going through the motions and just making sure that all the pins are kind of like knocked down in the correct order.
Yeah, going back to the original genre things.
Yeah, and I remember when What's New came out, I was really thrilled because it felt very much like going back to the spirit of Where Are You? But there was something that just felt a little bit off, and I kind of thought that maybe that was just, you know, the modern times and bringing in the guest stars and whatever. But I honestly feel like Be Cool is more successful in capturing that original Where Are You spirit.
That's so unbelievably fascinating that you say that, because that's constantly what I look at these franchises, like, wondering, like something like 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. I see, like, so the episode that we're using as a reference, My Shadow Demon and Me, there's a gag where the Shadow Demon corners them, a curtain goes up, and then they do ostensibly a musical number. And I'd like to point out that Shaggy is not voiced by Casey Kasem during that musical number.
Isn't that the weirdest voice?
It is jarring at best.
It's like they brought in B. Arthur or something to double for Casey.
Exactly. But they do that gag, and I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, in a different show, I could see this gag working really well. But for some odd reason, like, I'm only giving it a light, like, oh, I see what you're doing there. Like, I'm not finding it funny. And why? Like, what has been leading up to this that it's not landing like it should? And I feel like What's New Scooby-Doo, it does like a similar thing where I'm like, oh no, this is the trope that I love. Like what happened?
It's
like
the costume thing.
Yeah. Oh, the costume gag. If the costume gag ever shows up, no matter what franchise it's in, I will always laugh. That is my favorite trope of all time. But I can't figure out, like, when doesn't Velma or Daphne go back to she goes up to that shack, right? And Fred is watching her, and it's like a Hitchcock reference, right? He's in, like, the wheelchair watching her with the goggles.
Total Rear Window, total.
Yeah.
He's even like, you have to get out.
Yeah, right. And it's like there's setups, and there are, like, slight punches with it and reveals and stuff, and I'm like, I should be more amped about this. Why am I not? Like, what's happening with me where I'm watching this and it's not landing like I want it to? And I can't quite always pinpoint it, you know?
It's not always about you, Nick.
No, it is.
But yeah, I agree. Like, Jim Krieg wrote that episode, and I like Jim Krieg's work, and he's a huge Scooby fan. But there's something about, it's like you recognize where the jokes and stuff are coming from, but they just don't land as firmly as you'd want them to. And you can recognize where that musical number from Me and My Shadow Demon comes from. And there's just something that doesn't fit. Although in that case, I remember thinking Tom Ruger was, I believe, the story editor on 13 Ghosts, and he was kind of one of the main forces sort of driving that show. And that show does have a lot of Tom Ruger in it. Like, I could see any number of sort of those 90s Warner Brothers shows like Animaniacs. You know, like, that would have fit that show. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But, I mean, Tom Ruger also did Pup Named Scooby-Doo, and that show lands so much more than 13 Ghosts.
Did you know that Iwao Takamoto said that he did not care for anything that came after Where Are You until A Pup Named Scooby-Doo?
I completely can believe that, and I'm so that gives me a feeling in my tummy like I just ate the best hot dog ever.
Yeah, I think Takamoto actually came back. I'd have to double check this, but I think Takamoto did some design work for Pup Named Scooby-Doo because because when he saw, you know, the show or what was being made, he was kind of like, yeah, I can get down with this. I like this.
That is so fascinating. I mean, 13 Ghosts I think is interesting design wise, but I think Pup Named Scooby-Doo is interesting because it's broad and it is cartoony. I mean, it points forward to Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs because, you know, if you think of the villains in Pup Named Scooby-Doo, you think of the hippos in Animaniacs or even the pigeons in Animaniacs, you know? If you think of the villains in 13 Ghosts, you kind of think of, the 80s or even like 70s cartoons. That's sort of like Thundercats or He-Man, you know?
But, you know, that might work with A Pup Named Scooby-Doo because A Pup Named Scooby-Doo sort of created its own framework, and it's different character models, and it's different, like, the whole thing is kind of a different take on it, whereas 13 Ghosts, even though the concept was kind of different, where it's like we're chasing real creatures and whatever, it was still the characters. You know, Daphne had a different hairdo, and they brought in Flim Flam, but these were still the characters from 69.
When did Daphne get the jumpsuit? Was that...
That was 13 Ghosts.
She didn't have it in New Scooby-Doo show, or I can never remember what the name of it is, when it was pre-Flim Flam, when it was just the four of them hanging out, Scrappy, Scooby, Shaggy, and Daphne. There's like spy episodes and stuff like that. It's like in between Scrappy-Doo show and 13 Ghosts, Daphne comes back to be the babysitter.
I think I'm losing my Scooby cred here, my street cred, but I don't... I don't remember.
I mean, I don't know how much cred I have saying, like, I think it was around here. like I'm not going full spectrum on this to be like, it was in between 1975 and 1981, and the shows were called, except they were also called because on ABC they were this, and on after Time Warner bought them, they were then known as this from then on.
It was an episode with a production date of January 6th, 1972.
This has become my new favorite character.
The Scooby-Doo archivist?
Yeah, this guy is amazing. Spots disappear in frames 274 and 932.
I counted.
Twice.
Okay, do you find we're so like off the point, but who cares?
Ooh, but kind of on it. What makes Scooby-Doo Scooby-Doo? Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say something else, but you just sort of like reined me in here. The network. After Where Are You, the focus, anything that I've been told by anybody who's kind of worked on the shows or anything that I've read, the network sort of felt like all we need is the dog and the hippie, and that's why things gradually just became more and more about Scooby and Shaggy. And it didn't matter if all the characters just like left and went home to watch TV and just left Scooby and Shaggy to be there, because as far as they were concerned, it was all about the food gags and the cowardly screaming and running and the costumes and the whatever. And a lot of people do think that this is sort of where the franchise lost itself. And when you look at shows like What's New Scooby-Doo, like part of what was great about What's New, or even A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo was the first show where the cast was back together.
It's an ensemble piece.
As the four characters and the dog. And they've kind of kept that since then. They haven't broken them up. Except, well, with one exception, which is a much loathed show.
Get a Clue?
Get a Clue, Scooby and Shaggy or whatever?
Yeah, Scooby and Shaggy Get a Clue.
Yeah.
Have not watched it yet.
Neither have I. I'm really curious, though, because both Mystery Incorporated and Be Cool have kind of opened my eyes to slightly different sort of takes on things.
Yeah, it also, I mean, I've only really read the log line and like a couple episode descriptions, but it sounds like one of the like late 70s, 80s shows. Like the whole premise behind the show is that like I think it's Shaggy's uncle is an inventor and he disappears or dies or something like that, and Shaggy is now in charge of these inventions and he's preventing people from stealing these inventions. And that just sounds right out of like Scooby and Shaggy, or Scooby and Scrappy, or like, you know, the later Scrappy years, or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm like fascinated that they would go back to that sort of element of like, you know, it's not a villain in a mask. There's no mystery. It's like an actual antagonist that we're doing gags against. And I'm wondering how it would play in whatever that was, like 2004, 2005, something like that.
But you know what people really reacted to in that show, or what they hated about that show, I don't even think it was the show itself. Much like Be Cool, it was they just couldn't stand the look of it.
Sure, yeah. People on the internet have a lot of opinions. It's kind of crazy.
And like the show itself, there were interesting people behind that show. I'm kind of blown away that Mark Mothersbaugh did the song, the theme song and the end song.
Okay, shut up. What? That guy shows up everywhere. What is his career?
You don't know Mark Mothersbaugh?
No, I know. Why is he everywhere?
Because he's good.
It's insane. He did the Rugrats theme song.
He also did the music for Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and was part of Devo, and like awesome
Yeah,
stuff.
I more think of him from the Rugrats theme song, but yeah, that's fine. All that other stuff too.
And we are back. That was part one of my conversation with What's With You, Scooby-Doo producer and host, Nick Robes. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will join us again for part two in, I'm guessing, 3 to 7 days. I haven't decided 100%. I'm just going to wait and see sort of what the reaction is. Might want to give it a little bit of time to just give people an opportunity to actually like download and listen to it, not just throwing too much at them at once. And yeah, just watch online for announcements for when that comes out, unless you subscribe to the show, in which case you get notified about it regardless. And you can forever refer to yourself as one of the cool kids. I'd love to hear what you guys think. A little break from format. Now, I've spent most of the show pimping other people's stuff. I'm just going to do a couple of quick promos for this show. So feel free to comment on the Podcast Name Scooby-Doo Facebook page or the Podcast Name Scooby-Doo Twitter account. The Twitter is at ScoobyDooCast. Just search Podcast Name Scooby-Doo on Facebook. It'll come up. There's also an Instagram account. Follow us there. And the show has just been accepted as part of the iHeartRadio network. So if you know anybody who uses iHeartRadio to listen to their podcasts, let them know. It's great to have one more outlet that the show is available on. We're also available on YouTube and everywhere else good podcasts are available. If you get the show from iTunes, please give us a rating while you're there. And if you have a moment, review the show. Let us know what you think. Let me know what you think. And with that, we will bring this episode to a close. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate each and every one of you for checking out the show, listening to the show, and giving the feedback that you do online. It makes me all warm and fuzzy inside and just makes the whole process of putting the show together a little more painless. And if you've ever had to edit and mix audio, you know what I'm talking about. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Dang, I still don't have a catchphrase.
We noticed when the ghost appeared, she flew around in instilling fear. Exactly how she did was still unclear until we saw the broken flight rig of the balladeer, whose name is Kyle! The hovering balladeer! Kyle! Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration's my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.